Hi everybody. Hope everybody watching this is well, and those that are watching it for programming language information reasons rather than just to probably send you to sleep or relax you. Feel free in the comments section if there's anything in terms of learning resources or just pointing you in the right direction in terms of learning programming that you've got, like questions and things you want to ask, because I'm quite willing to take a look at any questions in the comments and just see if I can sort of guide you in the right direction. So this is the second of two videos, or two Musing on videos, that are about 90s programming languages. The first one I did a few days ago was 1990 to 1995. So this one is going to be from 1996 up to 1999. Again, I'm just going to go through and reflect in a very ad hoc way things that I remember about certain languages of that time, and the point that either I learned them or interacted with them in some way, and maybe some interesting side stories. Before I do that, I did want to do a little bit of retrospective housekeeping. As with all these sorts of videos, after the fact, I tend to think, oh, maybe I should have mentioned this or that was important. Not because what I said was wrong originally, but just something's just been brought to my attention on the timeline in terms of a memory coming back to me, or something I noticed that wasn't on the timeline directly, but might be important to the discussion. So I'm going to clear those up, a couple of things up, before we move on to 1996 and CSS. The first one was to do with Visual Basic, which I'd mentioned about in 91. So one thing I just wanted to clear up is it can get a bit confusing with Visual Basic, because there's a number of derivative technologies. So you've got VisualBasic.net, which is its successor. Okay, you have VBA, which is Visual Basic for applications, which is what's embedded into Microsoft applications like Microsoft Office and so on. Now, basically, VBA is largely the same language as Visual Basic 6, as it says here, with a few tweaks and tweezes here. I have used it inside of Microsoft Office, and the two main times I've used it is, one, to basically add code enhancements to access databases where I needed to create much more interactive forms or some form of form logic, which I couldn't do with the database side of things alone. And also sometimes when you're doing table updates, you used to find out, if it's still the case now, you used to have to write a little bit of VBScript to basically make sure that tables got updated correctly, where you had like when you're dealing with a relational database system, and you've got tables where you've got like a primary key, and then another table where there might be a column, that's relating back to that key in the other table through things like foreign keys and all sorts of things like that. And so therefore you often find that the database alone in its raw form doesn't have sufficient utility to do that on the fly, or at least when I was doing it, just by creating the links. So you have to go back in and create the appropriate triggers to create any subtables, whatever you want to call them. So access. And the other thing I used it on and off in is doing some neat things in Excel, where I wanted to create like a form that you filled in, and then it would take that information and put it into a spreadsheet, or into the spreadsheet. And we've got VBScript, which I'll talk about in a moment. That is listed because there's a reference, there's a connection to active server pages, which I've dabbled in. So that was the VB side of things. The other one that I did notice after the fact was Forth mainly. There is a reference to Common Lisp as well, but my main reason for skipping over that was that I want to talk about these when I do a decade, and another, say, paired decade musings on for like 80s programming languages or 70s or 60s or whatever. So I'm sort of tending to skip over later versions of programming languages where I might want to talk about an earlier version, which is not quite the same as, say, talking about a derivative language or language that's connected. So here you can see we've got ANS Forth, which is based on Forth. So I'd much rather talk about Forth when I talk about the period, the decade in which that was actually, created. Same, with Ada 95, I suppose, and there was something else I spotted here. Oh, Lisp, Common Lisp. So might be more appropriate to talk about Lisp, way back, in amongst all those other early languages like, COBOL and ALGOL and stuff like that. So let's move up to 96, CSS. I was thinking about this the other day, actually, when I was out walking yesterday morning. I was thinking about, my path through HTML and when the static became the dynamic. And I couldn't remember off the top of my head what version of HTML were we at when CSS, cascading style sheets, appeared. And I just never bothered to look it up when I came back. But now, hopefully, we'll go down that rabbit hole. So, yeah. So, 1996 CSS. Let's have a look. In actual fact, let's try and be a bit clever on this. I'll bring this up because it's... Yeah, there we go. And also, as always, I will include a link in the description to the original timeline, the pages where I'm delving a little bit deeper, and also the most appropriate external link, like the main external link for the language. So yeah, style sheet language used for specifying the presentation and styling of documents written in markup languages such as HTML or XML. Cornerstone of World Wide Web alongside HTML and JavaScript. So with me, what happened was I'd been dabbling with HTML before I did that web application development course that I'd mentioned, and I didn't do that till the 2000s. But I'd been playing around with HTML for just various reasons. I don't think I'd done any solutions for clients at that point, and I started working for myself around about 98. So this would be before then, and certainly I didn't touch CSS in, was it 96? Just out of curiosity, let's have a look and see when HTML first appeared. So, okay, 93, according to this. I don't think they really put it on here. Yeah, this is... it can be a bit hit and miss as to what it includes and what it doesn't include, unfortunately. But with this, I mean, stuff that I've done is so interwoven. I'm going to talk about these sort of simultaneously, I think, CSS and HTML. So as I've said, the first time I sort of formally learned the language on a course was when I did web application development program. There was the initial module combined, the client side stuff. So we had HTML, CSS, and then got onto JavaScript, client-side JavaScript. And as I said, that wasn't until sometime in the mid-2000s. But between the 90s and then I was dabbling in HTML. I'm trying to think. Let me have a look here. Oh, here we go. Timeline. So HTML2 95, 3. Yeah, 4 was 97. So I think when I started using it was sometime between this point, because I remember 4 coming out. I don't know if I've still got one of my really early HTML books or not. Because the one I used for my course would have been published quite a bit later. Because, you know, it was HTML around about the 2000s. And looking at that timeline, what would be out by then? Yeah, so it would have been pre-HTML5 when I learned it. So yeah, HTML4. So most of my HTML was in 4, but it's quite possible I looked at it slightly before then. I'll have to see and look and see actually after the fact what, just to satisfy my own curiosity, what my O'Reilly books are. I've got some of those really big, huge O'Reilly books from back around the time of HTML4, so I'll be curious to see that was, it must be covering this. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, CSS is the style sheet language. And as it says, used alongside JavaScript. So I didn't learn CSS until the mid-2000s when I was learning it as part of this web applications development course, and alongside HTML and then subsequently JavaScript as well. And I'm trying to think really, I became much better at it more recently, I think, when it was part of one of the Harvard CS50 courses. In fact, it's part of a couple that I did, and yeah, it was good to revisit it and reappraise my knowledge. Because I know, like when I learnt it, probably my CSS use was a little bit sketchy. In terms of, you know, where you're putting the CSS code and the most appropriate place for it. It's, you know, difficult, I suppose, if you've come from a situation where you weren't aware of it at all, like I suppose I was in that early on, before I did the course in the 2000s. I probably come across the term, but was mainly just using HTML. And so I think as you uncover it, you tend to use it a bit lazily if it's sort of coming along in parts. And then when I did the course, the web applications development course, then I became a bit more of an informed user of it. And then when I did the CS50, then a lot of stuff really dropped into place. So I think it's one of those technologies, you know, you have to periodically revisit and update your knowledge, because things like best practices may have moved on, and, you know, a few other things. Obviously, you know, you can see there's, you know, version CSS3, so it's important. I mean, this happened when I was learning HTML, like what's been deprecated, and you get all these sort of spin-offs, which we'll probably see, where you have various actually I'll talk about when we get to it in a moment. It'll come up in a moment because I don't want to misspeak. But yeah, you'll see what I mean. So it can go. You can go down various sort of problematic rabbit holes where either you're using, deprecated stuff, or the version or the type you're using, you're not aware that there might be some other things out there which have an impact on that and their usage as well. I can remember spending a lot of time. I don't know if anybody watching these videos remembers the sort of, what I would consider to be the bad old days of HTML, where things were pretty inconsistent, relatively speaking, across certain browsers, and there were some defensive programming tricks you had to pull to get things to render properly in the different browsers at the time, which was pretty interesting. And there were all these sort of clever hacks that you did at the top of the HTML in terms of maybe tags that were available in one, not another, and then also with certain JavaScript tricks as well. So it's always interesting when you're looking at these cornerstone technologies like HTML, CSS and JavaScript. And this is something I was thinking about as I was walking around the other day. Thinking about learning web technologies. And this is, I suppose, true of any programming languages. I think it's important to reflect on the point at which you actually learn the language periodically and think, at the time I learned that, what was the thrust of the perceived wisdom, and what has that changed at all? Because some people just sort of learn a language formally at some point, and then it slowly, their understanding of it does evolve over time, or not, as the case may be. And it is important to revisit, I think, and say, okay, well, if I was to learn that language now, would my approach be different? Sort of things. So yeah, and it got me thinking about other things as well, like frameworks. And I don't know if anybody remembers a product at the time, way back. It's called something like Hot Metal, I think it was. So I was going to look that up actually when I got back, and I forgot. But yeah, there were a lot of these things kicking around, and there was that whole period I went through of using Macromedia products that were WYSIWYG products, and they would produce the code for you. And I was fortunate enough, because I'd learned how to hard code the language in Notepad, in like a text editor, that I understood the underlying structure of the various components. And it was interesting when I was, got around in the late 90s into the 2000s to teaching people various things to do with the World Wide Web and creating websites and loads of other things as well. And you get that point, I think, particularly with the Macromedia products, and I'm trying to remember now what that one was called, because I know there was things like Fireworks at the time, and then they got acquired by Adobe, if anybody's familiar with them. But I can remember I had a few clients that were seriously into Macromedia products and had sort of reached that point where they did really need to get under the bonnet and start tweaking the code. And it was interesting, is that first exposure, when if you've not, that's all you were used to, is using WYSIWYG tools, and it's like, oh, okay, what's this? And seeing and trying to explain to them, oh, this is what this particular tag does, and it's possible to edit that if you need to get this, because maybe it wasn't behaving quite as you expected. So that's like suddenly people are have this realization that, oh yeah, there's something actually going on under the bonnet, which you don't get if, you know, if that was your step on point where, oh yeah, great, there's all these tools that just you can drag and drop and paint it. There was an iteration of, was it Front Page, I think, was the Microsoft product. And there was it Front Page Express, I think. It's coming back to me now as I'm talking about this, because as I remember sort of showing people various things, and I had a client that had created their own website for the purposes of researching their family tree, and they were using Front Page Express, and it was getting a bit ungainly by the time I even got involved. So I was having to sort of show them under the bonnet tricks, because stuff was misbehaving, because the code that it created probably wasn't totally optimized for what they were trying to achieve. So yeah, so that sort of memory brings back. I'll include links to this. I don't have any pearls of wisdom, I don't think, for, you know, CSS use, but I just thought, thinking about these stories is brings a smile to my face. Okay, yeah, I'll save another episode to talk about Perl more about at the time it was created again. So yeah, VBScript 96. So as I pointed out, you've got Visual Basic, sometime 93, VBA, and then VBScript. So I was aware of this, and I'm really trying to rack my brains actually and think, at what point did I, was I using it for system admin? Because I wouldn't have worked as a system admin back then, but I got asked questions about servers and various other things, and dabbled a little bit in server setups in the late 90s when I was working for a accounts consultancy, and initially they were doing their own hardware installs, and I talked them out of it because it was tying up a lot of resources and we weren't really experts at it. People had just picked it up as they went along. So I'd taught myself small business servers, stuff like that, and I'd said we should subcontract out our hardware setups because we were running into a lot of problems and making a lot of rookie errors on server setups. And I was saying, well, we should stick to what we're good at, which is the coding, and let someone else handle all that grief. So I think at some point I dabbled with VBScript on servers to just learn it, and then there was a mention there that it's used in active server pages, and so this I think was the context when I came across it again, when I learned active server pages sometime in the mid 2000s as part of that web applications development course. But beyond that, I don't honestly say I've never used, as a term I use, I've never used active server pages in anger. Like, I've never had to code up anything. The only server-side stuff I've ever done is in PHP for a client, and that was just really as a proof of concept, and I switched to doing it in something else. And again, as a project for the course, because obviously there was an ongoing website project that you had to do related to, I think it would have been, shopping cart stuff. And over time, we went from doing client-side coding to doing server-side. But the other place I've come across ASP is when I was working support in my last job. the accounting system, funnily enough, was built using active server pages, and it used Internet Explorer as a client for that. I mean, there was more of another client as well that you could use, but yeah, it was using active server pages, because I remember seeing the dot, it's like the endings on it, and so that got me curious. But I never had to modify any of that. Most of the stuff that I got asked about that, related to that, was performance issues, where, because I knew a little bit about how the server side worked, I could maybe offer the odd advice about when there were bottlenecks and various other things. And the other thing was more on the MySQL side of things, because MySQL, SQL generally, because there was a lot of SQL queries going on that people were doing, like report stuff, and occasionally someone might say to me, this particular query is not working, can you have a look at the code and just see if you can spot where, what I'm doing wrong or what could be wrong here. So yeah, that's and practically, you might ask yourself, well, why do I learn all these languages when, I have worked as a programmer over the years in different guises, either as I think I've mentioned, just doing it as a secondary occupation alongside another job. It's in order to, what would you call it? There's a word I'm trying to struggle to remember here, but taking a process and initially obviously computerizing it, but also taking manual processes and converting them to computerized processes. And so I've spent a lot of time doing that for myself. Automation, that's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, so I spent a lot of time doing in-house automation on and off of lots of different things. But I've only worked once as an external provider, if you like, to a range of clients for coding solutions, working for a value-added reseller. And then a little time when I was working for myself, I'd do the odd web solution for people, like if someone wanted a really simple website. But what I found is looking at different types of coding and how coding's handled, and the different paradigms and various other things. It was really helpful in my day-to-day job as just troubleshooting. So I could go in and look at scripts of various things and go, oh yeah, I can actually see where that's going wrong. And it just helped me read things like log files and XML stuff, and when someone was maybe rolling out a solution and it's got a Python component in it, and they're going, oh, I'm having problems, setting up the environment for this. Is it something you've come across before? And I can go, well, yeah, you might want to take a look here. There's a lot of that I used to do in support, IT support, troubleshooting. Is like, well, have you looked here? Or maybe you want to look here. And learning all these different languages and paradigms and programming principles and concepts, I find is really helpful with your pattern matching skills and your ability to identify certain common problems which maybe other people might miss. It gives you an interesting lens to look through, or set of lenses. So yeah. So moving on. So I need to put that up. So we'll add that to the list. And I'll drill down later through the resources, so you've got the appropriate website to go to look at the mother load for VBScript related stuff, if it's something you're curious about. Yeah, this I wanted to talk quickly about. So the standardization, that was the thing I was thinking about. Now I mentioned JavaScript in the previous episode, so I'm not going to go too far down the rabbit hole, but it's important to become aware of these ECMA things where you get these standards for certain languages. So we've got ECMAScript is a standard for scripting languages, including JavaScript, JScript and ActionScript. So anybody that's studied languages over time probably sort of becomes aware of certain, I don't know if schism's the right word, but stuff gets tweaked, languages get messed around with, certain suppliers maybe of browsers start adding extensions, and the score if you ever work with that. So often you come across this attempt to try and standardize something, so at least you can agree on some core features that, so within, say, a group of similar implementations, you might have a set of core features where everybody's like agreed on that. So if you do use those aspects of the language, aspects of the syntax, then regardless of what particular thing it's being used in. So here I might be talking about, say, web browsers for example. It's nice because you go, well, I'm not going to get, hopefully not going to get any surprises. So I just wanted to put a pin in the map here at this ECMAScript. I'll include a link. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole, but it is worthwhile having an internal discussion when you start to become aware of variance in a language for whatever reason, and start to ask yourself, okay, what's the core functionality here? Like, what's the core syntax, stuff like that? Is there like a safe way I can code in this language where, okay, it doesn't really matter where it ends up, I know it's going to work okay? So yeah, that's an interesting discussion to have and to think about. Okay, anything else here? See, some things I hear about and never go down, like Rebol came up recently. And this is another future series I've been thinking about, is picking a fairly common language that we can get some agreement on, that a lot of people use, and then go, okay, what languages was that built on, and do it, talk a little bit about those languages and where the commonalities are. Now that requires a little bit of work on my part, so I don't know when that's going to happen, but that's something I'm definitely willing to consider, is to pick a language and go, okay, well, where does all this stuff come from? And there's some super interesting ones, to do with their the sort of language heritage, if you like. Self-Forth Lisp logo. I do want to talk about Forth at some point, because it fascinates me. Like you see, there's ActionScript again. So ECMA. This is a really good table, by the way, if you haven't used this table before. I find it fascinating. Pure basic. Yeah. So you got all these different variants of basic obviously kicking around, and at some point I'll go back in time and we'll talk about original, the first basic, if you like. See, did I ever? So I did dabble with XML sometime in the 2000s. I can't remember what the impetus for that was. I think just because it was there. And so I went down various rabbit holes like these. Yeah. I mean, at some point, you're always going to come up against this sort of structure, I think. So XML, just understanding how that works as a concept, is a worthwhile rabbit hole to go down. You then have to decide where you want to go off of, But I find, you with data structures, you may find that there's certain ones that are worth knowing, and then you sort of just pan out from there. But data structures and file structures is something on and off over the years I get asked lots of questions about when I've worked in troubleshooting. In terms of like things like delimiters and also it's interesting with stuff like XML. If you're working in with data, you're working say in Python or any other language which has ways of handling HTML parsing data structures, is learning how to break these down using libraries or first principles or stuff like that, how you access the data here. Now of course there's libraries that can do this for you in various languages, but it is interesting if you've never done it to work out how you can slice and dice markup languages and data structures inside of files, like something simple like CSS or any of the other delimited structures. It's interesting when you come across some really old school delimiters and how it handles various chunks of text and those sort of things. We got a version of C99. Again, C, something I want to talk about, but in a past episode. Oh, this looks like this is going to be a pretty short episode. The trouble was there were so many languages that were clustered around 95, and I didn't really want to do a half and half episode. I thought, well, I'm either going to do all of 95 or leave it till this episode, and I did it in the last episode, so that's out of the way. I'm trying to see if there is anything else here that I want to go off down. Probably not, because I don't feel really qualified to talk about them, or I haven't really had an exposure beyond that. I'm just trying to think if I've got any interesting anecdotes around messing around in VBScript. Actually, one of the cool things, and I don't know if anybody had that expert for like what would you call it, like first contact with autocomplete in IDEs. So then that was through working in Visual Basic at some point. I can't remember when. You start typing the object names and it auto-completes the stuff. That's really cool. Like the first time you see it. I mean, now we just take all of that for granted, but at the time I'm thinking, this is going to save so much typing. So that was a nice have. The other one that was I think to really try and grasp is particularly in, I suppose more so in, just trying to think actually, no, it's probably in both, because you're using, if you're doing something decent, you're going to be interfacing with a form which has objects on it and various other things, is naming conventions for the objects on a form. So I'm trying to think of that notation. Is it Belgian? The one where you sort of do, like a label might be LBL in lowercase and then the name, or a button might be, I don't know, BTN or some sort of consistent labeling, rather than just object 1, object 2, or button 1, button 2, is having all these sort of meaningful names where there's a little 3-letter lowercase identifier at the front of it. So saying, well, this is the type of object it is, and then this is the name of it. So getting into that fairly on I found was a really good thing. And the other thing that used to really irritate me is when people had customized forms and then not redone the tab orders. I don't know if anybody's had that where they've been designing front ends to databases and forms, and they make a modification, add in a field. Works fine, but if you're using the tab to tab through the fields, they forgot to reorder the tab, so it skips over that field that they might have added in, gets to the end and goes back to it. That used to really irritate me. I had to show a few people how you'd like reorder those because they just either couldn't be bothered or didn't know. So yeah, so I think I'm going to wrap it up there actually. Let me know how you find these, whether it's something you're interested in me doing other decades. I'll be doing other stuff about programming. I'm just trying to decide the angle at the moment. I don't know if people are aware, but I know YouTube are working on some sort of slightly more enhanced training component in Studio to do with if you want to create courses. And it's not been rolled out to everybody yet, but I'm aware of it. So I want to see where they go with that before I start revisiting too much course-related stuff. So I've sort of put the Learn to Code, Code to Learn series on hold for the moment. And that was for another reason connected to problems I was having with learning Erlang, which I'm still wrestling with. So in the interim, while I decide where to go with any sort of more conventional course related stuff, I am going to be releasing videos like this, and a series I'm calling Reasons and Resources, which picks a language, says, why should you learn it? What are the advantages in learning it? And then look at some key resources to learn it. So it won't necessarily be instructions on tuitional videos, but it will be like where to find what I think are the best resources and the cheapest way to learn it without spending a fortune on courses, because there's so much free stuff out there at the moment anyway, including, so many authors now are releasing online versions of their books because they've released them under Creative Commons. So that's really cool. Case in point with Erlang actually. So that's one reason why I want to do an episode on Erlang, because I've sort of become aware of free online resources which have been released by fairly major authors under Creative Commons. You can still buy the book if you want to, and I found that most Erlang books, because most of them are a bit older now and deal with the core component of the language, are quite reasonably priced actually. So thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future episode.